We're here backing into or walking into the spring 2024 semester. It's awesome. Looking forward to it. I think we have a lot going on. No, I know we have a lot going on. Actually, I've been teaching this class for going on 3.5 decades. And I don't think I've ever started a semester without saying, oh man, there's a lot happening. We're going to have a lot to talk about. So, uh, but yeah, so I guess that's just the nature of doing a class on race and culture and ethnicity. It's just the nature of how it works. So anyway, um, we thought we would just hop on the stream today since this is the time of the class, Tuesdays and Thursdays at 3:05 to 4:20, and we thought we'd hop on the stream and just kind of get used to this 3 o'clock start time because it's really different. It feels different. There's a yeah, it's just it matters, in the flow of a day. Just talking about things and thinking through things and so on. So we had some time this afternoon. We thought, okay, let's just do a quick stream before next Tuesday, before we get started in the classroom. So Happy New Year. And one thing that I'm thinking is that maybe I'll just take a little bit of time. I'm not sure, how many people will hop on, but just respond to some questions that folks have. We don't have anything prepared. Nobody coming on or anything like that. So, but I thought I could respond to some questions or thoughts or things that people maybe would be really interested in hearing us talk about in the course of the semester. At this point in time, I only have plans for Tuesday's class, and even that I don't really have anything fully placed. But it's really the first class of the semester, so it's just kind of getting the sense, having students get a sense of things and how things will roll and so on. So we'll do some volunteer stuff, have some people come up to the front and do some things. But Tuesday will be really the first class, and again, I don't have anything planned for that. Just kind of waiting to see. So, yeah, Grandpa's place. That question right there is a really cool question. Yeah, it's kind of interesting that in what you were saying about the different answers from people in the East and people in the West. In the East, people will tend to almost always, well, not just the East, but lots of places actually, and more traditional cultures, Africa, many parts of Africa as well, but tend to choose their mothers. And so you could change that actually, your wife, your mother, or your child, and see how people respond to that. Who would you save, right? If the three were drowning, you can only save one. And here in many cultures, it's the mother, man. It's just the mother is everything, and you just are going to, of course, you would save your mother every single time. And in other cultures, it would be your child. Like you just save your child. I mean, everything's about your child. And in other cultures, it would be your spouse. Your spouse, because you could, I suppose, have more children if you need more children. But if you want more children, I mean, this is what people say, right? But you can't. Yeah. So anyway, that's a really cool question for me. Man, I think I would choose my spouse, kind of strangely enough. Not strangely enough, but I think I would choose my spouse. That's just kind of the nature of it, of who I am, which is the thing that's really cool about that question, right? So once again, you're drowning. You can only save. You have three people you have to save, but you can only save one. Your mother, your child, or your spouse. And that question says so much about culture, and about values. And it's not about right or wrong or good or bad, because any one that you save is going to be important. but it really says something about what we think about and what we value. So, yeah. So listen, Repentance 101. I see what you're saying about the insights about the Israel-Gaza war. It's things are just really going not well, obviously, and I don't know. I think if anything, if I could say anything about that war and about my perspective on it, is that I could go deeply into the details of the conflict, history of the conflict. I could kind of get a scalpel and kind of cut through carefully, kind of cut out who I think is more right or more wrong in different ways and why, and I could probably weigh in on that, like many people do. I would have been able to do it more clearly probably 10 or 15 years ago when I was really very carefully following the conflict. But increasingly I don't see that as my role. Other people can play that role. My role is to move forward beyond the conflict and to think about things beyond the conflict and make generalizations about the nature of human behavior. To remind people, I suppose, of what I think is true sociologically about human beings. So over the break, I was having a conversation with somebody, and they were talking about how if right now, if they were living in Gaza and they, lost their home and just witnessed the level of destruction that was happening, they would feel like they really wanted revenge, and they would act with anger and kind of a brazen violence. And I said, but you probably wouldn't. You wouldn't do that because that's not in human nature to take revenge. And this person said, oh no, I absolutely would. I know I would. And I said, but look, I'm just speaking as a sociologist and saying that the chances are you think that you would, because most people think they would want revenge and take revenge. But the fact of the matter is the vast majority of human beings think that, but they don't act on it because that's not it's just not how our DNA is constructed or puts us together, or we are put together. And I don't know how helpful that sort of thing is, but I think a lot of times many of us have to be reminded of different things that we don't see with the kind of clarity that it would be worth seeing. Like, for example, the amount of violence that's in the world and how we imagine the world to be a particular way when in fact like to be a really rather violent place. The more that we watch videos or watch news and read the news and sort of assess many different things, the more we imagine things to be really violent. And we have to remind ourselves that the world's a really big place. And even in conflict zones, the world is a big place. In most conflict, even in war, Gaza's a little different because, and Israel's a little different because they're both small, very small territories, in particular Gaza. But the world it's a big place, and conflict is generally very localized. And so, like, my job is to be one of these people to constantly remind us that things are not as bad as we imagine they are, and we are not likely to respond and behave in ways that we imagine we might. And for me, it's all about generalizations, and it's all about sort of understanding the ways in which we're the same and not different. And so if I can see people, I just have to imagine that most of us are inside the bell curve, this kind of curve of normalcy. And so, 67, some 70% of us are going to, on most everything, be inside of that curve. And so there are very small numbers of people at the very tail ends. So I think that's what we see. And and on the revenge issue, just think about how many times we learn of people who have had just really horrific things happen to them or been victims of crimes in some ways and have responded in turn with some kind of violence against the person who persons who perpetrated that crime against them, or the violence or the action against them. It's really very rare. I in my entire life, I think I know of one case where somebody kind of took it upon themselves later to act out against somebody else. It's one case, man, my whole life. And so I think that's okay. So somebody, opinionated Matt asks, what's my favorite book? I think my favorite book is Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. And it is my favorite book because it is just a really beautiful story of coming into one's natural understanding of meaning and spirit. And so it's actually a very small book. It's like 108 or 110 pages or something like that. So you can read it in 3 hours, 4 hours, but you need time to digest it. So it's worth taking a full day. But it's really just a beautiful story of somebody, kind of the difference between kind of seeking the creator and seeking meaning outside of us by following the teachings and the ways of others, and then just seeking it by going inward and trying to distill from inside of ourselves what gives meaning to life, and what happens when we don't follow or pursue the sort of the ways of thinking that have been kind of formalized in some capacity by other people. And so it's just a really, really beautiful book. And the ending is just profound, man. Yeah. Yeah, Grandpa's Place. That's, I think, what you're saying is, yeah. It just passes, man. It just passes. So, wow, holy smokes. All right. Let's see what else. I don't know if there are any. Opinionated Matt, you before taking her children back to Saudi Arabia, is that typical? Okay, hang on. Let's look at repentance. Let me see. Hey, Pavel, thank you for. Where are you, by the way? In Europe, I'm curious. So let me go to repentance for husband and finding when she was living freely in the U.S. Hey, repentance 101. I don't really get the full story, but is it typical for Muslims of Saudi Arabia to be cruel to their wives for leaving their prison house? Okay, so I'm not able to get back to your entire story, but I think if I had to guess, I would say it's no more or less typical. Anything that I see, I mean, mostly across the board. It's not true everywhere because there are clearly cultural differences, but the kind of cruelty that would be, I think you're pointing to in your comment. Again, for others, I can't really explain the comment because I can't see the full thing. But what I would say is that kind of cruelty seems to be in existing in kind of equal measures across the board. you know, it might just, it's cruelty in an interpersonal relationship with a spouse or children or parents or something that it just looks different. It just looks different. But I think, you know, kind of something that might appear cruel by the vast majority of people who witnessed it, right? I mean, you know, there are things that just seem to be cruel. You don't have to understand the culture, you don't have to be part of the culture. You just see the way that somebody is treated in some way, that just feels like it's really a, a, a disgrace, or it's like really just taking away from their humanity in some way. It's just mean. It's not uplifting. It's it's beating down in some way. I think that level of cruelty seems just pretty much common across, the degree of it seems common around the world from what I have witnessed. It's just that it looks different. You know, some cultures it manifests itself in one way. Um, so okay, yeah, maybe if okay, so here we go. Here's from class 5. Jeff, you're asking that question. Yeah, this is actually a really good question. Because the African diaspora, how does the African American experience differ from the Black diaspora communities, from other Black diaspora communities? Well, you know, one thing that is really important is that the African American experience is there. We have had a reckoning in the United States with with slavery in a way that's pretty profound. It seems like we haven't, but we have. It is very much a part of our conversation here in the United States. I mean, and what's really interesting about slavery here is how quickly, at the end of slavery in 1865, right at the end, so we moved back into a system that really mirrored what slavery was all about. It's slavery without slavery, and without the sort of legal component, that we pretty quickly passed laws that instituted a kind of new type of of control that wasn't slavery, but it mirrored it. It reflected it very closely. You know, the Jim Crow South and the entire Reconstruction period. And one of the things that a lot of people don't understand, or I don't know if we just, I guess we don't think about it, is and I say this because for about 12 years I taught a class on race and racial inequality in the United States. And I spent a good deal of time looking at Reconstruction period and post-slavery period. And what actually happened in 1865 when people who had been enslaved, Africans who have been enslaved, were suddenly so free, right? And what that freedom actually looked like and what it meant. And for me, when I first began digging into this in my 20s and then my 30s and really, really dug into it, everywhere I turned, I was absolutely blown away by the degree to which Black Americans never achieved an egalitarian space in this culture. I mean, some did, obviously, right? There were Black Americans who were not enslaved here in the United States during slavery, right? But and some were able to break out of the control that those systems held on them. But wow, man, very quickly, it was decided by those in power that we were just going to reconstitute slavery in some way, and that Black Americans then became sharecroppers and just dependent on wealthy landowners once again for everything. So there was this one particular book that I used, very well researched book, very good, in class. It was called Not Slave, Not Free. And the stories, the ways in which the landed classes, the wealthy elites in the South, were allowed to, and I say allowed to because politicians in the North just kind of allowed this to happen in order to get the South up and running again, because the country was dependent on production in the South. And we're allowed to just to hold, to pass measures to ensure that former slaves did not gain a foothold into upward mobility. And this went on for, close to 100 years. And that's, of course, right up to the civil rights movement. So I think if you don't study that, you can't help but have the idea that Black Americans, this Black diaspora here in the United States, Black Americans at some point in time after slavery had so many opportunities. Like, you're going to have this idea that Black Americans had so many opportunities to uplift themselves. And they just did not. They did not. And it takes a while to study this. It doesn't take a lot, but it takes a little bit. And it's pretty profound. And so it strikes me that and by the way, the semester hasn't started for me, so I've had 3 weeks off, and my mind is just turned into this, like, kind of emptied out, and I'm just starting to pick back up. So I'm kind of grasping for words that are not easily coming to me, and so so it's so I'm going a little slowly. So in any case, just to really quickly, the Black diaspora. So here in the United States, we've reckoned with something that, our Civil War was largely fought. Our singular Civil War was largely fought around this issue of slavery, and we've reckoned with it in ways that other diasporas, African diasporas, have not in different places. So that's pretty profound. And Black Americans are just in a very different position than many Black people in many other places. So, yeah. Okay, so here we go. How do we ride the thin line of being empathetic as well as practical when it comes to problem solving? A bit of a vague question, but curious to hear your thoughts. Hey, this is from Jack Bohm. Listen, this is a question that I wrestle with every single day when I it's like, what I just said right there about post-slavery period, right? When you study it, I'm going to directly answer your question, right? When you study this, when you study what happened, it's really amazing to me when I study it. It's what happened with Black people after slavery, right? Black Americans. It's amazing to me that Black Americans got as far as they did, given all of the obstacles that were put in front of them. Okay, mind you, this is one of those things that if you haven't studied this, if you haven't looked at it, from 1865 to 1960, if you haven't really looked at it, it's like, trust me, you have to go back and see what it is, because the obstacles were so numerous and so huge that it's surprising to me that Black Americans have been able to get as far as they have. And that's all I will say. Okay, so I say that, but the empathy comes in, and the practicality comes. It's like, okay, I see that, I understand that, I see where we're at. We're in the space where racism is much worse than some people think it is, and it's not nearly as bad as other people think it is. And so you got to kind of always come at it from these two different directions and be thinking about it. But then there's the practical questions, like, okay, well, here we have it. So what do we do? And what are we supposed to do? And this is, I think, what happens with a lot of people in the United States who listen to people with an activist orientation who are saying, like, we need to change things, and we need to give more opportunities to X, Y, or Z group or whatever the case is. And we need to battle the oppression and the racism and discrimination and so on. And so we say like, okay, but what, in a very practical way? Like what really are we supposed to do? Because in the end, the kind of change that the system change that many of us want requires individuals to take the steps to allow that, take the steps to transform the world just as they are being transformed by it. And so you can't sit back and wait for other people to make changes for you, because that change doesn't happen like that. It doesn't work. So you have to move forward. The individuals who are A, not inclined to move forward, or B, just not thinking that it's possible for them to move forward, have to move forward, have to do something very practical, right? Or right now, I think the empathy with regard to immigrants and the southern border. It's like, if you understand places and communities where people are coming from, and I've lived in some communities because I lived in Latin America and spent a lot of time in really, really just disastrously poor communities. I was in communities because I used to do research on the church back when I was in my late 20s, early 30s. And so I spent a lot of time in these rural communities in the Andes. And I'd walk into a valley and there might be, like 50 houses there. And there's not a single man anywhere between the ages of 15 and 60, let's say, because they've all gone to the United States. And there's just nothing there. The land is not fertile. It's not fertile enough. There are jobs. It's just a daily struggle to survive. And so people say, like, look, I either stay here and starve and my family starves, my parents, my grandparents, whatever it is, or I go. And if I go, I'm just going all the way to the US. And so I'm going to be on this border. And I'm going to find a way to cross over it, and I'm going to make some money, hopefully get over it. I'm going to make some money. I'm going to send the money back home, and that money will be game changing for my family. And anybody who would be experiencing that would at least have a 50-50 chance of saying, okay, I'm going to make the same decision, even though I might die. And so that's the empathy for me. I see that, man. I've looked into the eyes. I've talked to mothers who have not heard from their son in 3 months because the son took off to Al Norte, and just the pain and the grief and the sadness and of that, man. And not having food, man, just not having food, eating like a small bag of corn and rice every day for food, in the hopes that son will be able to cross over the border into the United States, find some work, and send money back home. Okay. The practical side is like, okay, look, man, okay, so what do we do? Right now on the border, you got 100,000 or a couple 100,000. I mean, you have so many people who are lined up wanting to cross over, wanting to come. Like, what do we do? Really, practically speaking. And what are we supposed to do? What's the moral question? What's the ethical question on one hand, but on the other hand, what's the practical solution, right? Like, what can you possibly do? And so you've got to, so the empathy is here and the practicality is over here. And so we got to hold those two things together. And it's very difficult, for me, if I stand only on one side or the other side, then I miss out on the struggle that happens when the two come together. And for me, it is that struggle with the two coming together that really matters. Like, that's what I'm wrestling with constantly. But it's the one that doesn't have a solution, man. Hey, thanks, Jay Savage. Yeah, thanks. So again, I want to just say, My professor, my mentor, told me this many, many years ago when I first started teaching. I was 24 years old, and he said, I'm gonna give you some advice that will help you to become a thinker." He always wanted me to become a thinker. Uh, and he said, sometimes it's just enough to ask the questions. You don't have to come up with answers, because the answers almost always are far more complex. The real answer, the true answer, the truth is almost always far more complex than your linear words can make it out to be. And so I yeah, so that's it. So sometimes I just have to sit in the center, but it's really difficult to do that. Um, man, because you want to, yeah. Okay, so the dogmatism, says Dr. Sam, isn't that always the operative question? What now? Where to from here? Yeah, yeah. That is always that's always the operative question, man. Which is exactly why I always say I'm glad I'm not responsible for coming up with the solution on the southern border, or in Israel, or in Sudan right now, what's going on, or 1,000 other issues that we're really wrestling with. And it's also why I try not to just criticize, right? Because it's so easy to just critique, to point out the places where other people are making where I think they're making the wrong decision, and not have to deal with how difficult it is to make those decisions. So, for example, I've been lucky in the course of my teaching career to have taught students who have gone on to take various jobs that have later have they've been able to come back and talk to me and my wife and I, and give us insights about what actually happens in those jobs. So one, for example, is a student who worked in State Department and National Security Council, and just really involved in the White House and in these settings, making these very, very complex decisions about things like our China policy. And I don't get all the details, but what I've learned on that is that these things are far, far, far more complicated than any of us could ever imagine they could be. When you're sitting at that table, whether you're the Biden administration or the Trump administration or the Obama administration, whatever it is, when you're sitting at that table and you're looking at all the issues that come onto the table and things you have to think about, things that seem so simple from the outside, right? And wow, it's incredibly humbling in its complexity. And what I will say is what I've learned over the years, and then also talking to people who are, leaders in in industry, right? Like CEOs of big corporations and that kind of thing. It's like, I'm just thankful. All I got to do is teach a class. All I got to do is just talk. I don't have to pretend to make any decisions that really are consequential for people. So when I hear people talk about, like say Biden and his, right now, just what's going on the border, right? Biden needs to make decisive actions, or they look at Trump and like things that Trump did or whatever it is. I don't know. It's like, man, it's I, I mean, not to say that there aren't certain decisions that people make that are just really bad and troubling and disturbing and that sort of thing, right? Just clearly wrong. But I don't know, man. It's very humbling. For me, it has been over the years. So I'll prefer to just do this class, had these conversations, and try to complexify as many issues as I possibly can, for people who sometimes can think it's very, very simple. I had a couple of conversations over the break with some folks who were just kind of laying out with definitive clarity the solution to certain problems that I didn't even respond, because I didn't need to respond, but they were problems that were not going to be solved with um, with definitive clarity, I'll tell you that. So, yeah. Okay, so Willis Manning says, I'm curious if you could touch on the potentiality of civil war versus where we were a year ago when you did that course. Wow, man, that is so like when I did that lecture, that class. Mm-hmm. This is a really, really cool question. Thanks for asking that. I well, number one, all of the militias in the United States have not stopped stockpiling weapons and ammunition. So let's like be clear about that, right? There was some talk about these militias and so on. Well, over the past year, those militias have been just stockpiling more, growing in numbers, right? Especially under the Biden administration, and have just stockpiled more weapons and ammunition, refine their plans, thinking about all sorts of stuff. So let's let's just hold that. That's really important because it's easy for me. It's kind of like with climate change. If nobody's talking about it, it's easy for me to just imagine it must not be as bad as I think it is because it's not leading the headlines, right? And people around me aren't talking about it as like a potential devastating problem and the potential climate collapse of the planet and so on and so forth. So I can just imagine like, okay, well, maybe we've solved it or something, right? Like we kind of are done what we've needed to do. It looks like to begin to close up the ozone layer. But the truth is things are happening underneath, right? And the skepticism, for example, a poll just came out that almost 30% of registered Republican voters think that the FBI was directly involved in January 6th and the storming of the Capitol building and so on, right? It's like, in my mind, I think so. Maybe some of you think that, right? I in my mind, but I don't think that. Let me be very, very clear. I don't think that at all. And I think when you have kind of views like that that are guiding people, and those views that are fracturing people's sort of ideas about what's going on in the world, or like separating it, like just like really extreme. Understand what it would mean that the FBI was participating in orchestrating the storming of the Capitol building, which is zero evidence of any of that at all. But like, understand what that would mean. I'm like, wow, man. So anyway, Willis, to answer your question, the potentiality of civil war, I think it's the same. I don't think it's really any different, and it's really sad, and it bothers me and it unnerves me, and it's just like a holy smokes, man. Okay, so I will say that I could say more on it, but I'll just familiar with street epistemology and the work of Peter Bogan? No. Do you see it as potential solutions for? You know what? I'm not familiar with that. I actually am. That Peter Boghossian guy, I am familiar with him. But no, I'm gonna hang on. Jeff, can you just grab that? I want to look that up. I want to look that up. Street epistemology. Okay. Or Jack, maybe you could just send an email in with some information on that. Okay. I'd really like to look at it. David Perkins, has the class covered Cornerstone speech? The Cornerstone, no. And the response by Nikki Haley, no, we haven't, because we haven't been back in class. And I wouldn't talk about that in class anyway with students, because students don't follow the news, right? So they're unless it's really a lead in the headline, they don't follow it. I don't follow things. I don't talk about things that students can't follow. I try to take certain things, maybe something like that, like say the elections or whatever, I try to do it in a way that would give people sort of a window into what's going on, but I don't get into specifics because they don't follow. And if they're not following the news, then what's the point of it? It just is like most of us. I'm assuming that there are very few people who are watching the chat right now who are on here who are 19 or 20 years old. So most of it, when I was 19 or 20, I wasn't following. And so if I had a professor who was talking about the kind of everyday events and the technicalities of things, like I didn't have any idea what they were talking about. So what I learned to do over the years is just kind of ignore specific pieces unless it can be a window into something that has larger general can a window into a larger general understanding of how people tick and how my students tick and what makes them, move forward, right? So that's why I wouldn't talk about that kind of thing, dude. And seriously, if I asked 800 students in this class, if I said like, hey, who's Nikki Haley? Maybe 50 of them would be able to say who Nikki Haley is. And of the 50, 20 of them would only know that she was running for president or she was some politician somewhere. They would have no idea. There'd probably be 20 people in that entire room who would be able to say exactly who she is, which I find is like, oh my God, right? Which is fine. That's how I would have been. So, yeah, there is really a way. We're trying to come up with some way for me to kind of hold the chat down. I'm during class, right? It's really difficult. I have this idea that we could put some kind of screen in the front row that I could see, but other people couldn't see, and like I'd be able to see the chat or see things that pop up in the chat. And in the middle of class, I would just respond to them, which would actually be really cool. But I think we're going to do more of these, like either on Monday or Wednesday, and I think it's actually going to be on Mondays. We'll do more of these where I'll just respond to things. Okay, Marians, I think Lenin killed more people than died in World War I were communism against villages. You are bashing Christians too much when atrocities were everywhere. No, listen. Hey, by the way, it's not bashing Christians, actually, Marian. So this is really important. First off, the Russians were part of the Russian Orthodox Church, and they're Christians. So once, when Lenin took power, and Lenin didn't immediately close down all the churches. So in Russia, that was actually kind of a slow process, and it finalized during Stalin. But they were Christians, and the vast majority of Russians, even through what we call communism, still identify with the Russian Orthodox Church. So as Christians, so I think that's really important to see that's also part of the killing. And in World War II, when what is it like 15 million Russians or 20 million Russians were killed. They were killed. They were still a Christian, even though it's a communist, so-called adapted communist nation. But you got to understand that when you have tens of, a nation of 100 million people or so, right? When you put all these territories that became the USSR, Union of the Soviet Socialist Republics, right? Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, et cetera, right? When you put them all together, maybe it's like 150 million people around the time of World War II. It's a lot. It's a lot of people, man. Hang on. Oh, I know what I was going to say. When the Russian Revolution took over, when the communists took over, you don't just snap your fingers and everybody's now a communist. Okay, it doesn't happen like that. people are living their lives, and there's a new government in power. And you look at like Maoist China, um, people are living their lives. It's like here in the United States, with the Republicans kind of get knocked out and the Democrats come in, or vice versa. It's like nothing changes for people, right? And there, nothing changed. It doesn't happen like that. So suddenly the Russia was Russia, and now it's the USSR, and it's a communist country. Everyone's the same. People, this is a beef that I have. I was talking with someone over the break about how Islam rolled out in Africa so fast, and just really in really a very short period of time, Islam just spread through Africa. It's like, man, first off, that doesn't happen because, first off, you don't just, people didn't just one day wake up and they're like, okay, I'm Muslim now. I mean, people are living their lives. People don't change. It's like, so first off, to spread that quickly means that you have to have people in power who make decisions like, okay, we're now going to be a Muslim society. And you have to have some violence involved. That didn't happen because, all the Muslims came through Africa and said like, hey, here's the Holy Quran, like we'll read this together and study this, and you'll decide that you really want to be Muslim, because of course you will, because it's a lovely, wonderful religion. And of course you'll want to follow Prophet Muhammad. And suddenly, in a matter of just a couple of decades, you have like a huge swath of Africa suddenly is Muslim. It's like, no, it doesn't operate that way. So Russia didn't operate that way. So anyway, that's just really important to see that. In any case, I don't feel like it's bashing Christians, but rather helping, because the communists, if you look at like Lenin and Stalin, and then post-Stalin and Khrushchev and so on, it's like, man, these are people who you call yourself a communist society. You're following the works of Karl Marx and communist ideology and so on. It's for the people, right? This is you've now created this this government that's of the people and like for the people, and you're taking on this ideology that where you've like destroyed the elites and the power brokers and so on, right? The state, the powerful state, is no longer going to be standing on the necks of the people. But yet you're using violence to do that. And like, what kind of communism is that? Like, that's just amazingly bold to think that this is good, that to use violence to ensure, like Mao's Cultural Revolution, right? That if you understand the violence that happened under Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution in China, it's like it's laughable on the face of it that anybody could imagine that this was better than what was. And so, so that's, I talk about that also. I mean, my God, but nobody identifies as communists these days. So whatever. So in those particular classes, just talking about Christianity. Okay. No time delay. I mean, restrictions. We have class before and after us, so we can't stream, how do I feel? So here was a question. How do I feel about South America's presence on the world stage? Argentina with the, yeah. Well, so my training is as a Latin Americanist. So when I started my work, my master's program work when I was 23, and then my PhD work, I was trained as a Latin Americanist. So someone who was really, traveling back and forth to Latin America. All my research was in Latin America. And I learned Spanish largely in Latin America. And then Latin America just kind of fell off the world stage. It was in the 60s and 70s and 80s, everything was Latin America. And then it kind of fell off the world stage in an interesting way. But now things are starting to come back, or we're starting to pay more attention in a different way. I mean, when I say fall off the world stage, I mean obviously things are moving forward in complex ways, but it's very different. So it's really interesting to see what is going on and to watch what's happening, for example, in Argentina and in Brazil, by the way. Okay. How do I see internal conflicts? This is Ryan Powell. How do I see internal conflicts getting worse as a country's economic situation declines? Do you think USA? Yeah. Well, listen, the problem with internal conflicts is that, hang on, how do I see them getting worse? I think hey, Ryan, you could answer this question. It's pretty straight up, right? That things fall on look at Argentina, right? Like let's look at some of the Eastern European countries. Let's look at Uzbekistan, for example, or wherever we want to go. Let's think about the conflicts and the as the ability to meet our basic needs declines. Human beings have to have a way of understanding the cause of that. And so we look at our leaders, number one, and we start having ideas and thoughts that we maybe never imagined that we would have. And so we might feel like, hey, I'm really, let's look at our southern border, for example. It's like most Americans are extremely empathic. Americans are known around the world to be really friendly and really generous. And the truth is, what people, regardless of what we say, this is like that vengeance thing that I talked about at the very beginning of our broadcast. Everyone imagines they would want revenge for something bad that happened to themselves or a loved one. In fact, few of us do. So we imagine, we talk about the United States, about Americans being really selfish and so on. Americans are just really, really friendly and quite generous and kind when they meet people, right? When they meet people, and I've countless stories of immigrants here in the United States, people who've come to the United States, traveled to the US and moved to the United States, are just blown away by the degree to which Americans can be really, really helpful and kind and generous. But we don't talk about it that way. So many Americans will talk about the southern border right now, like this is an invasion, right? But of course, the American people can be told that it's an invasion, or the American people can be told that these are a lot of economic migrants, a lot of people who are suffering and struggling, who are really looking to find a better way. And Americans will grab onto that storyline, that narrative, and they'll hold that. But many of the Americans who just say, like, no, build a wall, like, kick them out, don't let them in, and if they get in, kick them out and get rid of them. They're breaking the law. This is just a terrible thing, a bad thing, and we need to, stop this nonsense, right? These people, right? But if one of those people or one of those families showed up at the church, let's say, of one of those same Americans who are speaking so disparagingly about them and afraid of them and so on, the likelihood that same American who's saying, kick them out and get rid of them and they shouldn't be here and arrest them and whatever it is, the response would be to say, like, okay, well, we got to give them, it's cold out. They need a winter jacket. They need some food. What do we got to do? What can we do to help them out and so on, right? I mean, when you see people, when you encounter things, it's a very, very different story. So Ryan, but when the economy is bad and it's harder to shift into that positive story, it's a little bit harder to be helpful. and to reach out, right? So anyway, I think I'm just spinning in a circle. By the way, you got to understand, like I've unplugged my mind for 3 weeks, so I'm just coming back into it, right? This is actually really good to have this conversation before I have class next week, because it keeps me going. So it awakens me, like, oh damn, I got to get moving. So I think that the U.S., right now we're okay. The economy's okay. I mean, we can say, yeah, it's like great adage, like if you think the economy is working, ask somebody who's not, or so on. But the truth is, the economy seems to be okay. And Americans, for right now, everyone's like, okay, here we go. Oh man. Oh man, Grandpa, you said, I don't know about militias, but I got 77 square foot walk-in gun safe and over 1,000 rounds for each gun I own. Man, here's the thing. It's really not about owning how many guns you own, right? It's about how much ammunition you own. That's one of the things that I think about sometimes. It's like, you can own a gun, but if you don't have bullets for the gun, then what's the point of owning the gun? So it's really interesting that you say that 1,000 rounds for each gun. Yeah, that is like a key thing. Yeah, Willis, you're welcome. I see that. Axel, hey Axel, nice to see you. Despair, yeah, a blessing to the world. Yeah, thanks, man. Thanks. Yeah, I'll overlook your username, by the way. Despair. I try not to have despair. Like, I try to be able to laugh, because yeah. Hey, Marians. No, Lenin was an atheist. Thanks for saying this. Lenin was an atheist, but I'm not talking about Lenin. I'm talking about the 100 million other, or I don't know what Russia was at the time. Maybe it was like a country of 70 million. Russia itself, maybe it was about 70 million at that time. I'm talking about all the other people. Russia was a land that was ruled by the Orthodox Church, and so they were Christians, and people identified as Christians. And it took a while to sort of pull people out of that Christian mindset. It took many, many decades. And so one of the very first papers I ever wrote, I'm not, by the way, Marians, I'm not saying this as a way to, what I'm about to say is not as a way to say, see, I'm right and you're wrong here. But I want to be really clear about this. As a sociologist, I'm always talking about the people, right? And so the Russian people were Christians, and all up through the 20th century, they had the Communist Party had a very difficult time breaking that sort of Christian ideology. They eventually did, right? I mean, it took a couple decades or so, and even then, people just worshipped. They had to slowly start closing up all the churches, right? So. And now, of course, they're all open again. And so one of the very first papers I wrote, when I took a class when I was my first year of my master's program, I took a class on the Soviet Union. I read a book by Hedrick Smith. He was the New York Times correspondent to the Soviet Union back in the 70s for about 10 or 12 years. And he wrote this book called The Russians. I think it was called The Russians. But it was a really thick book, one of these kind of small paperbacks, but really, really thick. And I just got lost in that. It was the most fascinating book I had ever read up to that point in time, because it was a window into the Soviet Union, which I thought, hey, growing up, this is Soviet Union. You can't get in there. You can't travel there. Like we have no idea what's going on. And in fact, it was not at all. I could have traveled there, but I read this book and I just so much about Russian culture and Soviet culture and how the bureaucracy works and the system worked, et cetera. But I had to write a paper for that class. And the paper that I wrote was the paper on the rise and fall of the Christian church inside of Russia in the post-communist period. Well, at the end of Tsarist Russia, from like 1890 up until 1917, and then up for a couple decades after that. So I was really focused on on Christianity. I was always studying Christianity for some reason. That's what I ended up studying in Latin America was liberation theology in the Catholic Church. So I don't know why. I've always been fascinated by Christianity. But in any case, yeah, so that was that. Yeah, and so many, this is what I was talking about with communism, right? The regime, the Soviet regime killed so many people, man, so many people, to imagine that somehow they were doing the good work of the people, right? They were the people's party, the people's government. So like the horrors that were brought about by Lenin, but especially under the Stalinist regime, was just Stalin was unbelievable, man. Yeah. Yeah. So grandpa, so what's the difference between Islam and Muslim beliefs? So Muslims are followers of the religion of Islam. Okay. So the like Christians and Christianity. So that's the Islam travel very fast all over. Yeah, Axel. Yeah, it's Islam, and it's traveling really fast today in Europe. Yeah, I mean, Muslims are changing the face of Europe in some pretty profound ways. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen in Europe. I mean, obviously, Europeans Europe is a very secular place. Yeah, incredibly secular. So, yeah, not really trouble. But in American wars, okay, so hang on. Lenin was clear that he wasn't pursuing communism. He himself called his economic, So Thomas Leith. So yeah. So here's the thing. Under Marxism, it's like it's a series of stages, right? You sort of have the agricultural stage, the industrial stage, the post-industrial stage, the capitalist, post-capitalist, and then state socialist and full socialist, and then communist, right? And so the idea in Marx's writing, from what I remember, I used to read so much Marx back in the day. And I taught a class on theory, social theory, and spent about 5 weeks talking about this, and I can't hardly remember any of it, which is probably a good thing. But the idea is that the communist theorists, including Marx, would be like, well, you have to jump from capitalism to state socialism to communism, right? You have to go through these stages. And if you don't go through the state, you can't skip stages. You have to go through them. And if you don't go through them, then, you just have to go through them, right? So what happened in Russia with the Soviet Union is they go kind of from capitalism to suddenly people start talking about communism, right? But Lenin was still living in the world in this more in Leninist ideologies, say, no, we can't get to communism without going through socialism, like the full embodiment of socialism. And I think it was Stalin who took power after Lenin, who just started referencing the Soviet Union as a communism. Like, yeah, we've entered into a full communist, beautiful, glorious communist society, right? Without having to go through this stage of socialism, which everybody forever had said in a sort of a Marxist planning that, no, you're going to have to do this. You got to go through these steps. But they just decided, well, whatever, we'll skip the steps and we'll just call ourselves a communist society. Lenin wasn't pursuing, did not have any thoughts that they in fact had arrived at a communist social system and economic system. So this is expelled ducks. Some people like to identify as Marxist, particularly around universities. Well, yeah, because Marxist ideology it's a fascinating. First of all, Marx was a brilliant social theorist, right? So whatever anybody wants to say, like, first off, the fact that Marx, it Engels, but Marx could write, it's like Shakespeare. When you read the works of Shakespeare, you think, like, how is it possible that one single human being wrote all of these amazing plays? How it's not possible. This must be some kind of conspiracy. I was listening to the Merchant of Venice on when I was traveling a couple days ago, and all I kept saying, like, it's not possible that one person wrote this, like, and wrote all of these other works. It's not possible. I mean, the brilliance involved in that. Well, same with Marx, the brilliant thinking that you read. I mean, if you line up Marx's, all of his collected works, it's like 55 volumes. I mean, it would be the whole wall behind me, right? A whole bookshelf. You say, how is it possible that a human being did all of that? Of course, when I read it, it's unedited. So these are the beauty and the joys of word processors. It allows us to actually edit our sentences to make them readable and understandable. But when I remember reading Marx's works and just being like, wow, it's just profound that a human being could write this. And let's not confuse what Marx was writing, which is a sociological, political, and economic analysis of the world, of the development of society, right? Let's not confuse that with the practices and so on of the Soviet Union or communist China or whatever the case is. So, but yeah, and so a lot of people at universities get lost in that. It's really fascinating. And if you don't link Marxism to either the actual everyday or the actualities of Soviet Union and China and so on, the communist societies in the world, right, wherever they are, Cuba, Angola, I don't know. If you don't get lost in that, then it's just brilliant social theory and really fascinating. So a lot of us, we get hung up. We get lost in that. I used to call myself a Marxist, not a Marxist like communist, but a Marxist, a person who is fascinated by the works of Marx. But I was also fascinated by other works, the works of John Stuart Mill and so on, right? And so there were a lot of other social theorists who I was fascinated by. So, yeah, listen, yeah. So Marians, yep. You just the number of human beings that have been killed, around the world is pretty profound. Yeah. Okay. Opinionated Matt. I'm a weighted vote guy. Yeah. So I'm more of a weighted vote guy. You vote and do a test on the topic of the voting depending on the results of the test. So there's a specific weight of the vote. Yeah. Or weighted vote. Yeah. There are so many ways that we probably could do it. That probably would be better than ways that we often do it. But again, this is one of those things that I like voting. It's beyond my pay grade, man. I can't. Yeah. Okay. Bako Sandor. Is it a valid argument to say communism was indeed real, meaning the theory and practice in Eastern Europe was indeed real in Eastern Europe? Equality of wages, clearing competition caused demoralization across all sectors. Yeah, here's the problem, right? I remember when I first started studying the Soviet Union, and I studied it. Again, this is back in spring of 1984, And I studied with a guy who had a professor who spent a lot of time in the Soviet Union as a political scientist and an economist. And so I remember walking through how central planning worked in the bureaucracy, right? So, you want to make a mouse, right? You want to make, well, someone in the central planning office. It's not like today. I mean, we have many more goods available today. In the Soviet Union, you didn't have that many goods, but let's say you made the mouse, there was one. And you got to decide in the beginning of the year, 2 years ahead of time, like how many of these mice are we going to need throughout the country? And then you make that decision. And then you got to decide all the component parts that go into this mouse. And then you got to decide how many of those you're going to need. And you plan it out. And you do all this without computers, right? So like here's a nation that tried to plan everything out, every aspect of the economy out ahead of time. And then you got to decide where all of these things are going to be constructed. And you got to get each piece of this mouse to that factory on time, and each piece is dependent on all the parts that go into that piece. And you imagine trying to plan all of that out for everything that is built in a nation without computers, right? It's interesting. Over the break, I had a conversation with a gentleman who was kind of part of that at the post-Soviet breakup, and we talked a lot about the complexities of that. In any case, so it's very inefficient, and here's where where capitalism is so profoundly more efficient. Just let the marketplace play itself out. Every human being will just get involved in making all the decisions for how to make these mice. And some are going to fail and some are going to do a good job. But in the end, the mice will get made. And sometimes there'll be too many and sometimes there will be not enough. But over time, things will even themselves out, because people sitting in an office, accountants sitting in an office in some big, massive building somewhere, can never plan all of the things that you would need to plan for an entire economy, for all of the goods and services to be produced and consumed for years ahead of time. It's just not possible, even with supercomputers today. So imagine doing that without them. So in any case, yeah. So, and then to try to do that, making wages equal, right? It's demoralizing, right? First off, the product sucked, and it's just completely demoralizing. I mean, of course it didn't work. Now, did you bring up more historic components to the next class? No, I don't talk about history ever with certain. Yeah. Man, Marion, I see that what you just put in about the first Politburo. It so makes me want to go back. It so makes me want to go back and look at some of that stuff. Like, oh my God. Okay. On regards to this is Willis. On regards to the southern border, what are your thoughts on what's happening with the DOJ in Texas? I believe there's some drama in the courts. People are making a big deal of, yeah, well, what's going on is, and this is kind of interesting, that, the states right on the border are trying, they're in the end having to be responsible for migrants who cross over the border, which means, it takes a toll on the services that they're able to provide, right? Because they have to provide for their own citizens. And now they got this influx of immigrants coming over the border, and these states are responsible for them, right? So now the states say, well, and the federal government gives a certain amount of money, right, to the states on the border, right, to handle the migrants, but it's never going to be enough. And so these states, the Governor Abbott and Texas and what's his name in Florida? Yeah, for some reason, it's just the name's blank because it's beginning of the semester. So in any case, and in New Mexico and Arizona and so on, like they what do? They say, well, why don't we just put them on a bus and we'll send them up north to these areas in the north that have claimed to be now, what is it? What are they claiming? They're what's the word? Man, can someone put it in the chat there? All these like our particular town is a something free zone. Oh my God. My brain is okay. All these liberal towns like my own in the north, uh, sanctuary cities. Oh my God. Thank you. Sanctuary cities. Right. And so, okay, well, how about if you're going to be, if you want to be a sanctuary city, why don't we send a few bus or plane loads of human beings up there so you can actually practice what it means to be a sanctuary city? And then you can help us out, which is really fair, here in the United States, that even for migrants themselves, right? So spread out, like don't put too much pressure on any one social system in one particular community because they won't be able to meet your needs. So like spread out, like let people move to all these areas, but in particularly so-called sanctuary cities. So it's like, yeah, you want to be it's beautiful as an activist check, right? If you're playing a game of chess and you're these kind of conservative and liberal activists, it's a checkmate to the liberal activists. So it's really a brilliant move. But in any case, Willis, that's what people are making a big deal of, because now you got all these, when a bus full of human beings shows up inside in your city at the bus station, you got to do something with people, man. You can't just send them out on the street, especially in cold winter times like we're in. And so this is the part of human beings that, you just got to step up. So I think it's actually a brilliant move on the part of these governors in the South. Yeah. Jack, what's the most important question that people are not asking others or themselves? Well, oh man, this is like, holy smokes, man. Probably, look, some of you may disagree with this, but I would say probably the following. If climate change, if the climate scientists are real, this is for me the most important question. If the climate scientists are correct, and these are really smart people, and I know that there are a lot of people who say like, oh, but there are all these researchers, they get paid a lot of money to make these assessments to talk about how doomed we are, and the earth is the climate is transforming, and so on and so forth. I know some of these people. In fact, I know two of the leading climate scientists whose names people would know. And they're very smart scientists who are trying to get things right. They really are trying to get it right. They have no agenda. They have no interest in pushing some idea that they have to say like, no, it's global warming is real, and here's why, and now I'm going to get another $5 million in research. It's not like that at all. That's people outside of academia that don't understand how it operates. These are really, really smart, thoughtful people. They're collecting data as best they can. You decide like, hey, I want to study something, right? I want to see, is the earth warming? So what are the different ways I can do that? Well, I could study like ice cores in the Antarctic, or I can study deep ocean temperatures. And so what I got to do is I got to figure out then how to get how do I study ice cores from 100 or 200 or 500 years ago, or just 100, just pre-industrial revolution, and how do I study ocean temperatures 150 years ago or whatever, to see we changed over time. And so they come up with a way to operationalize these measures, and they find a way to collect the data to study this thing and do the best they possibly can because they want to get it right. And what the message is coming back consistently by the vast majority of these very thoughtful people is that the Earth, the climate is changing. In some places, it's cooling. In other places, it's warming. Overall, it's warming, and we're in. We're going to see more droughts, and we're going to some places, and we're going to see more flooding in other places. It's just very haphazard. We can predict much of it, but it's not just like there's a steady everywhere on the planet. It's all going to happen in the same way. But everywhere we turn and we ask people, what do you see? What are you seeing where you are? Where you are. I was just in a conversation over the break with someone. It's like, what have you seen here? It was a person who's been running a golf course for 30 years. And I said, like, what have you seen over the past 30 years? And they've listed the changes that have just like absolutely happened. And there's no sign that they're ever going back. And everybody I talk to, wherever you go, anywhere in the world, little farmers, sheep farmers in Scotland, or, you know, people who lobster fishermen in Maine, wherever you want to go, everybody has a story about how things have changed in the course of their lifetime. Okay, if that's the case, then this is Jack. The most important question that we should be asking is, what does this mean? If these folks are correct, and I would say it looks like they probably are, right? We can't measure a timeline and so on, but what does this mean? That's the question. And for many of us, it doesn't mean anything because there's nothing really we can do. Because it's not about individuals change. But if I change my behavior and you, Jack, change your behavior and Jeff changes his behavior, that doesn't have any impact. It really is about transforming the ways in which human beings are living on the planet in large collectivities and large groups and systems. So that's probably the question I think that we're not really asking. And in part, we're not asking because, and I've said this a couple of times to various audiences in a couple places around the world, that we cannot comprehend an existential threat such as climate collapse. You can't. There's no way to hold that in our minds, like what it would mean. And so, you know what I mean? Like I can't hold it. It's like death. I can't hold death. At some point, everything around me is just gone. Right in 5 minutes, I could just have a major heart attack or an aneurysm or something and just be gone. Nothing. I will take nothing with me. And I can't hold that. I can sit with it for maybe like 10 seconds and I feel like there's something moving in me, but I can't hold it for very long, nor can I hold the idea of the existential threat that climate collapse poses if we look into the future. So, yeah. Grandpa's place, a gun without bullets is just a club or a spirit. Yeah, if it has a bayonet, yeah. 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 So Axel, yeah. You definitely like over time, by the time I really got engaged in the Soviet Union, people had largely kind of given up the ideology of Christianity. But I was in Ukraine a few years back, and man, the churches were open and they were packed. And when I was in St. Petersburg, Russia, a few years ago, same thing, man. Churches were open. I mean, people weren't particularly, they weren't packed with people, but not like in Ukraine. But yeah, yeah. Thomas, I like that. Lenin's Marxism, as far as I can tell, was all branding. Yeah, exactly. It's too bad Lenin didn't live longer. Because it would have been really interesting. First off, just to get Stalin out of that, like shit. Okay. In opinion, in your eyes, for a society to thrive and evolve, is it better to be secular or maintain some important faith, religious aspects of culture? I think that it's kind of like what I just said about climate collapse. I think most people need. I don't, myself included. Most people have to make sense of where we came from and where we're going. Like we need that. Religions have kind of dedicated themselves to that, right? I mean, it's an ideology, mostly a social ideology, because it's about morality and ethics and showing people how to live life day to day, right? And so, which is what religion does to us, right? It connects us with some kind of meaning of the origin, where we've been and where we're going. Um, we need that. People need that. Yeah, I don't. I it's rare that I find like look, I meet people who are just like it's just rare. Let me just say it's most of us need something that will explain, you know, what's going on. And and I suppose then some organized sense, and I say organized because I don't want to just sit in my house and come up with some kind of way of understanding the universe, right? Meaning in the universe, and again, all of the co- the co- cos the cosmology of life, right? I don't want to just sit on my own and do that. I want to have other people around me because it grounds me into a larger sense of purpose. And of course, this would be the role of some kind of religion, right? Or meaning some sociological component to those belief systems. So I want to be with other people who I think have some kind of reasonable understanding or have share some of the same ideas that I share about that. And so that's the religious aspects of culture, right? Because culture is the the norms and values and practices that bind us together. Well, you just throw meaning of past and present on that, and then you start to get into religious aspects of culture. So I think that's probably necessary. I think I think yeah, I think that's probably necessary as a sociologist. Most people can't do it without that. So I just came out of okay, hang on. What would happen if the US passed laws that were on par with England or New Zealand? David, that's a really cool question, but I'd really want to know what in particular do you mean by that? That's like I don't which laws and like what are you looking at? That would be kind of a cool that'd be a cool conversation. Uh, yeah, yeah. Wayfaring. I just came out of World Mission Society Church of God, a cult that believes in a Korean woman being God the Mother in flesh. Given enough time, do you think any cult can develop to be a new ethnicity? Well, if you think, by the way, I'm familiar with the Mission Society Church of God. I spoke at one of their events actually, and every time I go into Korea, they're always asking me to come visit them. Um, the idea is that God first off, it's fascinating why for most of human history, probably in most cultures. I mean, I've read a little bit on this, but so many cultures see God in a feminine form, right? That like the feminine face of God, right? And so many traditional cultures envision God as a woman, and this kind of maleness. It doesn't make sense in a way, right? Like women give birth, so God gives birth to the world. How do uh, so how would God a male figure, right? I mean, again, I don't see God as male female kind of thing, but we talk in this way. Human beings talk, so like it's so much easier to envision God as a woman giving birth to the universe, right? Um, and so it's so interesting that here's this Mission Society Church of God, very much a Christian organization, a Christian orientation, but believes God is the mother in flesh, right? Or the Korean woman being God, the mother in flesh. it's pretty cool, actually. I mean, that sense of it. Yeah, 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 yeah. Thomas Marx. Yeah, yeah. Wrong about many things, but Marx was wrong about many things. But like this is what I like to say. I'm wrong about most everything. There's a few things I get right, but when you write words, that would be like 50 volumes, you know, all of that packed together, you're going to get wrong on you get wrong on most of it. If you get half of one volume right, you're still killing it compared to most people. Like, oh my god, yeah. So that I like that. That's a cool. Uh, hey, yeah, Ryan. Yeah, hey, you're welcome, man. For doing that. I get put a shout out to Jeff and Renisha and everybody else on the stream team for kind of putting the class out there, and for Penn State allowing us to do it, because I think it really, you get a chance to see what folks are what folks are saying, what students are saying, and don't forget, no matter what, don't forget that when all of us were 18, 19, or 20 years old, we did not have a lot to say about anything. So, like, if I was 18 years old and some knucklehead professor brought me up in front of the class, put a camera on me and projected me out into the world and started asking me questions, oh God, I would cringe having to look back and see what I said. So I think that that's really, really important that we remember that. And so, but this is that people change. Kevin Jansen, greetings from the Netherlands. Did you write any books? I have a couple edited books, and I have a book I wrote with my wife. And I have a book that I wrote. Actually, the most important book that I wrote was one that never got published, that I never published. It was my research, and from my research in Ecuador when I was in my late 20s and early 30s. And I put this book together, and a manuscript, and I sent it off to University of Chicago, and it was going to launch my career, and I sent a chapter off in a summary of it, and the University of Chicago was the #1 publishing house in sociology at the time, and they wrote back and said, "Hey, we'd love to publish this. Why don't you make X, Y, and Z changes and send it to us and send it back at the manuscript? Yeah, this would be great for a series that they had, right?" So I worked on it for another 8 months or a year, I don't know how long, and sent it back to them. And thought, like, okay, that was it. This will start my academic career. I'll be a writer or a researcher, and on the side I'll teach classes and that sort of thing. Well, about 4 or 5 weeks later, I get a letter back, because this is before computers and so on. This is, I guess, about 93 maybe. And the letter said, "Hey, thanks for sending this, but we're not interested." And so I could have just sent it somewhere else to another publishing house, right? I mean, this was the top publishing house, so I just could have chosen somewhere else. But instead, what I did was I took the manuscript that was sitting on my desk with a copy that I had. I moved it to my shelf, and it's still sitting there to this day. 30 years later, it's still sitting on the shelf in my office up at Penn State. Never sent it anywhere else. Never looked at it. Over the years, a few people have asked to read parts of it or whatever, but it's really not that interesting if you're not interested in what the topic was. And then that was the last I ever did. I said, I'm not writing books. I'm not doing any of this. I can teach a class, and my class is real. I have an audience, and there it is. And why am I going to write books that, half dozen, or if I'm lucky, 50 people would ever read the book? And the most books that academics write, maybe it'd be like 50. If 50 people read your book, I mean, you sell it to a bunch of libraries, and so maybe you sell like 1,500 copies, but maybe at most 50 people read it. More likely 10 or 15 read it, and 5 of them are your family members, so they kind of feel obligated. For your first book anyway. Once you get to the second and third book, nobody feels obligated to read it. not even your own spouse. So I just said I'm not living that life, and so I just stopped. I gave that up. The idea that I would be a kind of a tenured professor who, does that kind of work, and I decided that I didn't have it. Yeah. Okay, that's the story of my book. That's the most important book that I wrote that became that is still sitting in the office, which is pretty cool, actually. Daniel, hey, Sam, been following you from Sweden for a while. Love your lectures. We really need your clear, compassionate reasoning here. Trying my best in spreading awareness of you existing on YouTube. Daniel, back in December, we did a class, or we did one of these streams, and there were 3 people on it. Matt was on from Italy, Arnica from Germany, and who was on from Norway? Somebody from Norway, I forget. But in any case, we were talking about the issue of immigration, and I'm absolutely fascinated by what's going on in Sweden right now with regard to immigration. So, I've talked to various Swedes, and I'm really, hey Maziar, yeah, I would really like to see you. I have Martin, yeah, Martin, yeah. I'm really fascinated by how Europe is being transformed through immigration, and without looking at the good, in me as I am looking at the good and the bad of it, right? I mean, let's be clear. Like, the immigration leads to changes. Like, we get settled into a particular culture, and we get used to our culture and our way of being, our way of living. And so nobody wants to change that a lot. I mean, I don't want to change a lot of I try when I travel, when I go to other places, I try to integrate myself as much as possible with other cultures, because I want to have the experiences. I want to do the things that other people do, and I would give up my culture up for a week or 2 or a month or whatever it is, right? So that's what makes life interesting to me as a sociologist. But my own culture, I enjoy the things that I do here. I enjoy I've come to terms with living in the way that I do inside of my own culture, not the United States per se, but this particular space that I inhabit. And so, it's a struggle for any of us to give that up, and that's what immigration asks us to do. It brings opportunities for us to experience some things differently, and it brings opportunities for other people to become part of our culture. But at the same time, there's this very fine line where it goes from opportunities to obligations and things that maybe we're not entirely comfortable with. Some of the changes that come along with high rates of immigration. So, Daniel, in any case, so and societies often get it wrong, right? We still, damn it, we don't figure out how to assimilate immigrants into our social systems, right? So this is something that I'm talking about a lot in my various talks that I give in Korea, because Korea as a nation is going to be bringing in many, many more immigrants, and you got to try to get it right. So, anyway, so Daniel, I'm really absolutely curious about I'm really curious about how things are unfolding in different places in Sweden, because Sweden's a big country, right? I mean, it's not a big country compared to the United States, but it's nonetheless a big country. So, hey, go. Oh man, I'm just scrolling through the chat. I've just got to the place of like climate change, right? So yeah, I think that there's in ways there's I don't know, there's no answer there's no answer to it, right? So, yeah, we're not going to convince. This is the struggle, right? We're not going to convince people, 4 billion people, 8 billion people, right? But people want more. People in hot places want air conditioning, right? People in cold places want heat. People want cars. People want, yeah, there are many, we want comfort. Human beings want comfort. And when we have comfort, we want more comfort. And so the problem is we're not going to convince people of these things. And so we have to live with the consequences of it. And at best, we can try to slowly shape people or move people in the directions that will make deep divisions, fracturing, and civil conflict less likely when these changes start becoming more and more apparent that they are going to happen. If the climate scientists are true, and I just happen to think that they probably are, because I think that they're pretty smart people, and it's just kind of where it's going to go. So, anyway, that's the. So Sam's. Yeah, okay. There are no atheists in foxholes. Yeah. Hey, listen. Well, Don P. So this is why when you have when we have like a health emergency or something, right? Or the potential, staring death in the face or something, that we start thinking very quickly about what's going to happen next, where we're going to go, and where we will be. And it's profound. It's very unnerving, man. If for any of us who have ever had a health emergency or a health issue that is potentially life-threatening, that the feeling that happens, that just the bottoming out of our stomach, like the oh shit moment, it's devastating, and it's scary, and it's even those of us who, like me, I think, man, I've been thinking about death my whole life. My father died when I was 9. I watched him. I see him die. I'm prepared. I'm ready for this, and I'm not ready. I have not been entirely ready. So it's pretty amazing. So yes, there are no atheists in foxholes, or there might be a couple, but there are a couple atheists in foxholes, but those are the curmudgeons who don't. Those are the ones who just aren't. They're not thinking about it. You know what I mean? I wish to take a class like yours when I was younger. Kids need to realize their opinion. Listen, most kids, though, what Don P, I want to tell you, most of my students, if you listen to them talk when I'm interviewing them, when you listen to them talk, they are, hey, thanks, Willis. My students are surprisingly aware, especially when you put them up in front of I give them a microphone. Well, that's not a microphone, but it looks like a microphone. I give them the microphone. I say, hey, they are surprisingly aware that they don't have the answer, that other people are pretty smart, and that they better think or listen more than they talk. And it's that should come through in our classes, in these live streams. And I think that's what we really want to come through, because it's quite impressive, actually. We talk about things from a distance, but the truth is, the young people today, because we watch TikTok or whatever it is, and you see all these people with their what seem to be really definitive views. But if you take the vast majority of young people and give them a microphone, they'll say, like, yeah, I don't really know. I'm just here to figure it out. And that's pretty damn cool. So I hope that comes through. Well, it does come through. I know it comes through. That's kind of the nature of it. Okay. All right. So, hey, listen, y'all, I think we should I think hey, Axel, no, I didn't hear about that conference. Maybe you could send me something on it. I'd be really curious about it. Okay, I'm almost caught up on the chat. I saw that, Jeff. All right. Yeah. All right, listen, I'm going to Michael from the Netherlands. Man, it's all these Europeans watching. That's so awesome, man. I just really hang on. I want to read this. I want to respond to this question by Stephen. What is your opinion on separation of culture, specifically for child raising to adulthood, to allow individuals to truly immerse and understand their culture? Okay, so I'm not sure what exactly you're asking, but I think it's a cool question. For a child raising going to adulthood, to allow individuals to truly immerse in this. Hey, Stephen, maybe you could say that a little differently. I'm not entirely opinionated, Matt. That's a really, really cool question. I'm sure that I think from what I think you're saying, I think I would say for child raising. Oh man, I'm not certain exactly what you're saying. I'm sorry about that. Okay. There are a couple of atheists in foxholes. Yeah, that's a quote. Write that down. Okay, so listen, I'm going to head off now because I gotta jump into a 5 o'clock meeting at my time, and which is in 8 minutes. So I'm gonna hop off. Stephen, I really wanted to answer your question, but maybe I'll get to answer it another time. But listen, so here's what's gonna happen. We have class next week, Tuesday, Thursday, at this same time, 3 to. Hey, Izzy from Macedonia. Man, awesome. I was in Greece a few years ago teaching a class in Greece, Kavala in the north, and I had a student from Macedonia. Okay. Yeah, thanks. Man, thanks for watching the long videos. Okay, so, and then probably we're going to be doing one of these streams where we're going to be really consistent, where I just answer questions from the class. And from things that come up in the class that I don't have a chance to answer, that people on the stream would want to answer. So I think that's pretty cool. All right. Isabel from Switzerland. Man, all these Europeans. Y'all are.
I also did want to say, let me see if I can do this quickly. Let's do my entire screen. No. I can't do it. We have the podcast running on Spotify and on iTunes. So if you want to listen to the audio version of any of the classes, including these streams that we're doing on Wednesdays or Mondays or whenever, we're going to post everything on Spotify and iTunes for anybody who likes listening in your car rather than on YouTube or Twitter or wherever else.
Awesome, man. I love that. Yeah. All right, listen, thanks, Jeff. Thanks for making it happen. And we'll catch everybody. Like, yeah, thanks for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Okay. Be well.